In the last movie, we got an overview of what we were going to be creating with the content management system, and we made a blueprint. And I firmly believe that's the best first step for developing any application, is that blueprint. And I believe the second step should be to build out your databases. Get your databases in at least roughly the structure that you think you're going to want, and then you can start working with PHP and not have to keep switching back over and making modifications to your database that might break other parts of your PHP code or something like that. If we get the database so that it makes sense and follows our blueprint and is the structure we want, then we can move over to PHP and for the most part stay in PHP and connect to the database and teach PHP to use that database that we've created. So in this movie, we're going to be building that database to match our blueprint. We already learned how to work with MySQL, and we saw how to work with MySQL from the command line directly, and we always have that as a tool to fall back on. But we also have seen how wonderful PHP-MyAdmin can be and how much it can help us. So let's do our database editing in PHP-MyAdmin. If you haven't installed it already, you'll want to go back and review those chapters and get it installed, get it configured, and then come back and join us. So I'm going to just open up a new browser window. And I'll go to where PHP-MyAdmin is stored, http://localhost. And if you're on Windows, that'll be enough. On a Mac, you'll also need your username, PHP-MyAdmin. And that'll take me to my installation of PHP-MyAdmin that we configured earlier. And my databases are right here. I've got Widget Corp that we already created earlier. You'll remember we created our database, Widget Corp. And in that database, we put our first table, subjects. And we see subjects here. We can actually click right here and see the structure of subjects. We'll see that we put in an ID, which is an integer that's going to auto-increment. And we have a menu name. It will be the name that the subject displays in the menu. And then we have our position, because we need to make sure that those subjects come in a certain order. And that way we can rearrange the order of our subjects. And then last, a nice feature, whether or not that subject is visible. So we'll actually be able to take subjects offline and make them invisible to the user without actually having to get rid of that data in the database. That's another nice feature. Now we're going to need to add pages to those subjects, and we're going to do that with PHP-MyAdmin. So we're going to click on the database name, and you'll see here it says Create New Table on Database Widget Corp. So we're going to make a new table, and we're just going to call it Pages. Now I want to say a word about table naming. I've opted for all lowercase, plural, for the databases. I find that this works best. You'll see that a lot of other developers will do other things like TBL capital pages. That's fine. It's a reminder to them that it's a table. There's nothing wrong with doing that way. It's a personal preference. For me, I can remember that it's pages. I'm comfortable just leaving it like that. And then how many fields am I going to want on these pages? Well, I'm going to need an ID, obviously, just like we did for subjects, so that we can refer to these pages and be able to update them or delete them by their ID. I'm going to need the name that's going to be in the menu, and I'm going to need its position and its visibility, just like we did for the subjects. That'll be a nice feature. But then, in addition, I'm also going to want to have the content of the page, so we'll need that page as well. So let's count those up. That's 1 for the ID, 2 for the menu name, 3 for position, 4 for visible, and 5 for content. So let's go ahead and put in 5 fields. So the first of those I've already said is going to be my ID, and it's going to be an integer again. And I don't have to tell it specifically that it'll be 11 here, it'll default to 11, but I'll go ahead and put that in there. And I just hit my tab and it jumped over, and I'm going to not worry about collation or any of those things, but the one thing I want to make sure that I do over here is that I pick this checkbox right here, and that's underneath the key, and that says primary when I roll over it. And that means it's telling it it's the primary key to use when referring to the database. When we do a create, update, delete command, it'll quickly be able to find it because of this checkbox right here. And then the last thing is I want to make sure in the extra that I set it to auto increment. So for the ID field, we're always going to do those 2 steps. We're going to set it to auto increment and primary key. Now I'm just going to scroll back over here to this side, and I'm going to go ahead and type in the rest. We've got our menu name, right? And I'm just using underscore name, but you could use something else. It's going to be a varchar, which is a way of saying that it's going to be a character string of variable length. So it's something like a variable. So I think 30 will be long enough for most menu names. And then I'll jump down here and we'll put in the position. And the position is going to be an integer because that's just going to be a number for what order it's in. And we don't need 11 integer places. 3 should be enough integer places. That's going to get us up to 999 before we run out of integers. And I don't think we're going to have that many pages. And then we'll have visible. And visible can be what's called a tiny int. And that's basically the same thing as a Boolean. We'll just say it's going to be a 1. It'll be either a 0 or a 1 in that spot. And then last of all will be the page content. And I'm just going to call that content. And the type could be varchar, but varchar has a limit of 255 characters. And we might have a very large web page there. Who knows how much information our client is going to want to put in. So we're going to use the type text, which is basically unlimited. For our purposes, it's going to be a very large block of text that we can use. And we don't have to specify a length because it's going to be so large. And that's it. And then we'll just say save. And we've now added our table pages. So now we've got our subjects and our pages. We know we're going to need one more database, which is that we need a database of users. So let's follow those same steps again. I'm going to go quickly through it this time. And we're going to add a table called users. And the number of fields for our users is just going to be 3 because we're going to have an ID, a username, and a password. And then I'll say go for that. We'll create that new database. Now, because I've got only 3 fields, it actually gave me a slightly different layout here for it. I've got instead of going horizontally, they're going vertically. Yours might do something a little different depending on which version of PHP-MyAdmin you have. But I'm going to still need to have my ID field, and then it's going to be an integer. And with all ID fields, I want to remember that I'm going to need to set extra down here equal to auto increment and give it the primary key characteristic so that the database will know about that. Then I'm going to do username. We'll make that a varchar. And we'll go ahead and give it 50. We'll let it be 50 characters long, possibly. That should be enough to cover us. And then for the password, I could just call this password, but we're actually going to store our passwords in an encrypted format. So I'm going to call it hashed_password. So we'll go ahead and use the type varchar here as well, and that'll let us put in characters for the password. And we'll go ahead and make it be 40. Now, the reason I picked 40 is because I already know what kind of password encryption we're going to be using, and I know that the encryption is going to return something that's 40 characters long. Now, we could choose other methods that would be a different length, or we could go ahead and make this bigger. We could make it 50, and it wouldn't hurt anything. It's just basically telling it the maximum size that it will allow to go into this spot. So that's it. Once we've gone ahead and told it that we have an ID that's an auto increment, a primary key, we've got username and hashed password, we're ready to save it. And now we have our table users as well. Now, we don't have any kind of relationship between our subjects and our pages. And we need to have some kind of a relationship there so we know which pages belong to which subjects. And that's going to bring us to a brief discussion of relational databases. And we'll take a look at that in the next movie.